Each believer has a combination of gifts that God gives to them. No one can say that I don't have any. No one can say that God overlooked me. God overlooked me. Didn't get any, sorry. No. You have them. They're present. They're in your backpack, so to speak. They are there, ready to be developed and to be used. Well, if we could have our Bibles open again to Romans 8, but also if you would put a bookmark in, Romans 12, and have a bookmark in 1 Corinthians 12. So you should remember Romans 12 or 1 Corinthians 12. They are the two main passages dealing with the gifts God gives believers to serve him. I'm bringing this message today because last week we looked at the ascension of Jesus, his ascension, and when the Lord went up, the Spirit of God came down and with him brought gifts for the church. And so I want to talk today about us using our gifts in the church, and then, Lord willing, next week to begin a series around the character attributes of God that'll take us through, Lord willing, to the end of the year. So I felt this was a sort of nice place to finish up that resurrection, ascension, and now spiritual gifts teaching. I, as you know, grew up in Sydney, and I went to an all-boys school, and it was a good school. It was strong academically. It was strong in the area of sport. We had a lot of guys that were representing the state, Australia, in water polo, rugby, sports like that. And of course, there were co-ed and girls' schools and other schools in the inner west area. And there was one particular school, particular college, and you had to apply to get into this college. With most state schools, you just have to live within the suburb you're in. But this particular college was called the MacDonald College. I think it still exists today. It's moved, but it was touted as a school for the gifted. So if you had a gift in music, in art, dramatic arts, things like that. We had a lot of drama at our school. We had plenty of that. But in terms of acting and music and culture and arts, if you had a gift in that way, then you could apply to that school. They'd let you in, and of course they'd give you more time, apart from the maths, English, geography, to do your music, your acting, sculpture, all of those kinds of things. So it's fair to say that every single student at that college, everyone had some kind of special ability that got them there. They're in that college or school because they have a special gift that needs to be developed. It needs to be improved because, as you know, if you're really good at music or art or drama, that can be your job, right? I mean, that can be your 9 to 5, that can be your income, that can be your career, more. So every person, every student in that school was gifted. Well, friends, it's not an exaggeration to say that in this church, in this little church, every believer here has a gift that God has given them. Probably many gifts, probably a unique combination of divine abilities that every person gets at salvation so they can serve Jesus Christ in the body, the local church. Those gifts are found in Romans 12 and in 1 Corinthians 12. And when you look at them both side by side, you see that the gifts that are within any church are to do with speaking, with teaching, with declaring, but also with serving practically. There may be other gifts not mentioned. For instance, the gift of music is not specifically mentioned, but music certainly teaches and it certainly encourages. And so there's probably a very wide variety of things God gives to us, if you're a Christian, that you can serve him in the church and you give him glory for, because this is what God gave you. This is the abilities that he gifted to you. And so I want to make a number of different points this morning, and I'm happy to send you the outline later on. But a number of different points. If I give you the outline, you know how many points I have. It'd discourage you. So I'm going to keep that secret. I'm just going to keep on talking about different points. But the first thing I want to say is that the Holy Spirit gives believers gifts to serve him for God's glory. For God's glory. If you look at 1 Corinthians 12, verse 7, he says, but the manifesting, the revealing of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit, the benefit of all. When God gives a Christian different abilities, he gives it to them for the benefit of other people. The benefit of other people. That's where the blessing comes in us serving others. I appreciate our ensemble, the abilities they have, and you know what? They can have a great jam session at home on their own. But I tell you where the blessings get maximised, here, and elsewhere. The abilities God gives us are ultimately for the benefit of others, not ourselves. In 1 Corinthians 14, when Paul deals with how the gifts of tongues were being abused, it had been corrupted when those gifts were available. And Paul says, listen, you need to be using your gifts for edification. 6 times in 1 Corinthians 14, he talks about we're meant to be edifying each other, not just the spotlight going on somebody. Edifying. The Spirit gives believers gifts to serve others, to evangelize to the glory of God. God saved us so that we can serve him. He saved us to serve him. If we're not serving, that is an indication of a problem. Let me make another point about the gifts that God gives us. This is not the same as the fruit of the Spirit. There are gifts of God's Spirit, but then there's fruit. The gifts that God gives us is what we do. The fruit of the Spirit is who we are. Who we are. We know from Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, things like that. This is who you are. This is how you respond to things. This shows us that the Spirit is working in our character, but those gifts of God to serve each other is the Spirit of God involved in our calling. Now, the fruit of the Spirit, just like a fruit tree, carries one fruit. I've not seen any trees and there's a lovely strawberry, and then there's an apple, then there's an orange, then there's a few blueberries down below. It's a tree with one fruit. Same with the fruit of the Spirit. It's one fruit. It's one fruit. We don't get to choose our favourite piece. I just like to love. I'm not very patient. I'm very hopeful, but I can be very harsh. No, it's every aspect of the likeness of Christ, actually. Galatians 5 is really a portrait of who Jesus Christ is and who we need to emulate in all that we do. We know that every believer has a spiritual gift. Every believer has a spiritual gift. We saw it in Romans 12, verse 6. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us. We saw that in Ephesians 4 last week. Every believer has them, and they're probably as unique as our own fingerprint, as the likeness of our own face. So unique, just like our own personality, God gives us gifts. And what it means is that someone can have the same kind of gift, they like teaching Sunday school. Teaching Sunday school. And some people would love to teach the toddlers, but they're terrified of the teens. And some love to teach the teens, and you couldn't give them the world to teach the toddlers, right? And so that teaching ability can go in different directions, in different angles. Okay. Each believer has a combination of gifts that God gives to them to use. No one can say that I don't have any. No one can say that I don't have any. No one can say that God overlooked me. God overlooked me. Didn't get any, sorry. No. You have them. They're present. They're in your backpack, so to speak. They are there, ready to be developed and to be used. In fact, if you would go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and I want you to see verse 11 of 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And it's very important because it says here, but one or the one and the same Spirit works all these things, one Holy Spirit, distributing to each one individually, notice this, as he wills. He could have just said he distributes to each one individually, full stop, but he adds something just to highlight this is God's choice. Distributing to each one individually as he wills. God gives us a combination of gifts that he decided. He decided. And he didn't need our input. He didn't need our input. He could make the decision, as we say, all by himself. And every combination of abilities God gives every single believer is exactly what we need individually. No believer left behind. Yeah? No believer left behind. What's the challenge in education today? Kids getting left behind. Yeah? Kids getting left behind. Well, no believer gets left behind. No one sort of has to live their Christian existence without all that God has given them to serve him. To serve him. He has. None of us get left behind. And because God has gifted us the way that he decided, we should be content with what we have been given. As one of our kids' school teachers used to say, their prep teacher, you get what you get and you don't get upset. That's how it is. That's how it is. So if the Lord wants you to really maximise in showing mercy or in giving, or you want to teach this class or whatever it is, if that's how God's wired you and equipped you, then make the most of it. Make the most of it. Rejoice in what God has given to you. We're simply stewards of what he has given to us. All right. Now I want you to just turn to another place today, just a few pages after 1 Corinthians 12, this time to Philippians 3. Philippians chapter 3. And my next point that I want to make is that our spiritual gifts don't always correspond to our natural abilities, but they often do. Let me explain. Look at Philippians chapter 3. Paul says, in the middle of verse 4, if anyone else thinks you have confidence in the flesh, okay, in your earthly status, I'm more, he says. Look at verse 8. Circumcised the 8th day, the stock of Israel, tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew of the Hebrews, concerning the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. And he goes on and says, the things that were gain I count as loss, But what Paul had was a first-class Jewish education. That's what he had. He's got a mastery of the Old Testament. That's what he had. And because he had all those things before he was saved, after he was converted, God used those things that happened in his life. That's why he can write Romans. So he can write Romans. Because of all his background and knowledge of the Old Testament. But of course he needs Christ to reveal many more things to him so that he can give us the New Testament. But God uses our past. Think about your past. Think about your past. Think about all the things you got and you didn't get. And you didn't get. The last few weeks, few months, I haven't been so upset that I didn't get to go to Harvard or Columbia. Yeah? I didn't miss much. I didn't miss much of those places, let me tell you. I didn't miss much. Think about things that you got and you didn't get. God uses those. Even the things that you missed out on. Even the things you missed out on, God will use in your life if you trust him. If you trust him. Now, we talk about Paul. I mean, he's this scholar. He's a Pharisee. But then think about most of the guys Jesus chose, the fishermen. The fishermen. They're not going to write Romans. But they are going to preach the gospel. And they are going to become fishers of men and women. So God used those years on those boats. Those late nights, those early mornings. The fear factor, the storms. The patience of being a fisherman. The skill of when to throw those nets in. God used their backgrounds. He used their backgrounds. And so there are things we get at our birth, and there are other things we get at our new birth. We get gifts at birth and gifts at our new birth, and how it all works out, I don't know. But God does. God works all of them together so that we can serve him. So that we can serve him. Understand that. Understand that. Go back to 1 Corinthians this time, but then I want you to go to chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians. Chapter 1, because spiritual gifts are not a guarantee of spirituality, unfortunately. Even when God gifts his children, it doesn't mean that they're going to live for him, unfortunately. Look at verse 4 of 1 Corinthians 1. Paul talks to the Corinthian church. He says, I thank my God always concerning you for the grace of God, which was given to you by Christ Jesus, that you were enriched in everything by him in all utterance and all knowledge, even as the testimony of Christ was confirmed in you. Look at verse 7. So that you come short in no gift, Paul says. The Corinthian church, as troubled as it was, had every gift available. They're as gifted as the Ephesian church and the Philippian church, the Thessalonian church, the church of Colossae. This church at Corinth, though they had their problems, every Christian there had gifts given to them by God. The problem was they weren't using them properly. In fact, Paul later tells them, look, I'm still going to have to give you milk. I can't give you meat to eat. You've got to drink milk still, because you're not growing as you ought to be growing. So they had a lot of giftedness. However, they weren't using it properly. Sometimes people can use their abilities to manipulate others. I'm going to show mercy and kindness and this to so-and-so, but I'm expecting something in return. We know in the Corinthian church there were those who loved Paul and Apollos and Peter, and so you had factions around different leaders, different preachers. So when Peter's coming, they'll listen to him, but when Paul comes or Apollos, they're not showing up. They'll go somewhere else. That's the kind of feeling it was, friends. That's a sign of immaturity when people play favourites. the person in the Old Testament of whom it is said the most that the Holy Spirit came upon him, the individual in the Old Testament of whom it said that the Spirit of God came upon him the most times was Samson. Samson. Very gifted, not very godly. When truth be told, not a godly man. Tended to be very self-willed and took for granted those gifts of strength that God had given him. Ends up eyes out, wanting revenge. We'd say Solomon was gifted by God with wisdom. We know he had some wisdom already, and then God just lavishes him with wisdom. Lavishes him with wisdom. I mean, you've got people travelling the world to meet him. Queen of Sheba and others visiting him with gifts and just wanting to hear a proverb from him. And then you read Ecclesiastes, and then you read about other stuff that's going on. Yeah, wise, but still very self-willed. Very self-willed. In fact, the Bible puts more emphasis on our heart than on our hands and feet. The Bible emphasises who we are, not what we do. Let me give you a statistic. There is 11 times more information in the New Testament about how we treat each other than on spiritual gifts. There's 11 times more exhortations around loving each other, serving each other, than what we are to do for God. The Bible emphasises the kind of person we are, not what we do. Not what we do. Okay, we're in a world and often a church culture sometimes where it's about, well, what do you do in church? What do you do? What are you up to? Whereas the Bible emphasises who we are. Who we are. Now, would you believe that we're up to point 8? Point 8. 8 points. 8th point is that we are never told to discover our gifts. Think about that. We're never told to discover our gifts, but we are commanded to use them. Now, that sounds counterintuitive because you might be thinking, well, I don't know what mine are. Well, what are they? Remember, Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:6 to stir up the gift that is in you. It's there, use it. Use it. What you have, use. Now, you might be thinking, still, look, but Pastor, I don't know what they are. And you're telling me just to use them. That's right. That's right. Do you know that it might be that finding those gifts are as easy as asking these questions? How can I be a blessing today by serving others? How can I be a blessing? How can I bring God glory? How can I contribute to the common good of our church? And when you start taking different steps, right? God opens doors for you. Telling you. I mean, we're Open Door Baptist Church. He's going to open them for you here. Promise. I promise. You just be available to serve him and doors are going to fly open for you here. Going to fly open. When people seek to join our church, we say, look, are there things you're interested in doing? And we have a list of stuff we do. And I think we have a question, anything new? Anything new? Is there anything else that you bring that you got a burden for? We had a young lady in our church pre-COVID who had a heart for the homeless in the city. And we encouraged her, helped her, and she'd go into the city with little care packages, New Testaments, gospel tracts, food and things. That was her thing. Now, not everyone does that. Not everyone's wired for that, but it was a really necessary ministry, you see. If you're available, God will show you. It's as simple as that. My second last point is that there is always joy in serving Jesus. There's always joy in serving him. There's a joy in doing things that you don't think you're that good at. Even if you think, oh, but I'm really good at B, but Pastor asked me to do A. Well, there's even joy in doing A. And eventually you'll get to B. Right? Hang in there. Be faithful. Paul delighted in serving others. In Philippians 4:1, he called the Philippians my joy and crown. He got joy in serving Jesus Christ. Kent Hughes wrote a well-known book, Disciplines of a Godly Man. He wrote it back in 1990. Sold many, many copies. And he talked about the church scene where he was in the United States. This is a good 30 plus, almost 35 years ago. And he talked about the way that often in churches there are people that come and they don't serve. Let me read to you what he says. He says, the credo of many of today's attenders is this. You go to the meetings, you serve on the boards, the committees, you grapple with the issues, you do the work of the church and pay the bills, and I will come along for the ride. Come along for the ride. That kind of life is very unsatisfying. Very unsatisfying. You might say, I'm too busy. Too busy. For what? The truth is that you and I always find time for what we think is important and or what we want to do. We'll do what we have to do and what we need to do, but also what we want to do. Too busy. For what, I ask? Maybe there's a selfishness issue. Some people just have to wait to be asked. They've got to wait to be asked. Or I just don't like the way things are done here. And so I'm not going to do anything because I just don't like the way things ought to be done differently. And so if it's not exactly how I want it, I'm not going to do it. It's very sad, very sad. We've got this rare problem of some did so much in the past, they don't need to do any more now. I hear people of what they got up to in 1975. I mean, they were the most faithful church member back in the 70s, and they went to everything, they did everything, and they did so much that it's all done. Don't rest our laurels on, none of us can live in the past. We can't live in the past. If a church is good enough to come to, it's good enough to serve in. And I do believe that is the heart of our church. I believe that. I believe that is the norm. I'm thankful for it. The last point today is this, is that there is nothing small or menial done for the Lord. There is nothing small or menial done for the Lord. In Zechariah 4, verse 10, the question is asked, who has despised the day of small things? David is taken from the sheepfold. He's taken from looking after the sheep. Because it was apparently good preparation to be a king. A king. It wasn't just military school, it wasn't cadet school, it was being a shepherd. That was good training for being a king. Jesus said in Luke 16:10, he who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. How we do the small things is virtual proof of how we do the big things. How we look after little things is just a proof of how we'll do other things that we think are more significant. So are you serving the Lord today? I'm not going to focus on the actual gifts themselves. You can see those and you can pray about those. And I would encourage you to be open to trying things. But let's say theoretically, deep down, I'd like to maybe help with a Sunday school class or help with youth group or help with something, but you've never done it before. Never done it before. The only way you're going to find out is by trying. It's the only way you're going to know. And it could be a great success, or it may not. It may not. It could be something that, you've got to work at, most likely. But you've got to try. You've got to try. And our God is so wise, and he has so many things happening all together at the same time, that he will get you where you need to be. If you're a Christian with an open heart, God will get you to where you need to be personally and also in this church. He has it all figured out. But he wants willing participants, willing sons and daughters of God to say, Lord, just lead me and guide me in how you want me to live for you.